The stage had left Alara Quinn in a cloud of dust 3 hours ago, and she'd been walking ever since. Her boots, the only pair she owned, had split at the seams 2 days back. Each step sent a sharp bite of pain through her left foot, where the leather had worn through to skin. The Montana sun hammered down like it had a personal grudge, and her dress, once a respectable gray wool, now hung off her frame stiff with dried sweat and red dirt. She'd eaten last in Billings. A piece of hardtack and some questionable jerky a freight driver had tossed her way when she'd offered to help load his wagon. That was 36 hours ago. The town of Covenant Ridge appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a scattered collection of wooden buildings hugging a muddy excuse for a main street. Alara's vision swam. She blinked hard, forced herself to focus. This was it, the last stop. If she couldn't find work here, she was done. She'd heard about Covenant Ridge from a woman in a boarding house in Helena. Rough place, the woman had said, but they don't ask questions. If you can work, someone will hire you. Alara could work. She'd spent the last 8 years proving it, cooking, cleaning, mending, anything that kept her fed and hidden. The problem was the man she'd been hiding from had finally caught up to her in Helena, and she'd had to run again with nothing but the clothes on her back and 11 cents in her pocket. The main street was busier than she'd expected. Ranchers loading supplies, a blacksmith's hammer ringing out in steady rhythm, women with parasols picking their way around horse droppings. Alara kept her head down and made for the general store. Stores always knew who was hiring. The interior was dim and cool. She stood just inside the door for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, breathing in the smell of coffee and leather and tobacco. "Help you?" The clerk was a thin man with wire spectacles and suspicious eyes. "I'm looking for work," Alara said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "Domestic work. Cooking, cleaning. I'm capable and don't need anyone." He didn't even look up from his ledger. "I wasn't asking if you needed anyone. I'm asking if you know who does." That got his attention. He looked her over slowly, taking in the worn dress, the broken boots, the way she was swaying slightly on her feet. "You got references?" "No." "Family in town?" "No." "Where you from?" "East." She wasn't giving him anything more than that. He snorted. "Every woman who shows up here is from East, most of them running from something." He went back to his ledger. "Try the boarding house. Mrs. Talbot might have something. Might not." Alara turned to leave, and that's when the dizziness hit her full force. The room tilted. She grabbed for the counter, missed, and felt her knees buckle. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. "Easy!" A man's voice, close to her ear. "When'd you eat last?" She tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't cooperate. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're about 10 minutes from passing out." The hand steadied her, guided her to a chair someone had shoved behind her. "Get her some water," the voice said, sharp with command. Alara forced her eyes to focus. The man crouched in front of her was maybe 35, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of weathered steel. His face was all hard angles, strong jaw, straight nose, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He wore working clothes, dusty and worn, and there was a quiet authority in the way he moved that made the clerk scramble to obey. "Drink." He pressed a tin cup into her hands. She drank. The water was cool and tasted faintly of metal, and it was the best thing she'd had in her mouth in days. She drained the cup. "More?" She shook her head. "I'm fine, thank you." "You already said that. Still not true." He settled back on his heels, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You new in town?" "Just arrived." "Looking for work?" "Yes." "What kind?" "Anything honest." Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe, or recognition. "That's a broad category out here. Honest work and survival work don't always overlap." "I'll take what I can get." He was quiet for a moment, still watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. Then he stood, pulled a few coins from his pocket, and set them on the counter. "Give her some bread and cheese," he told the clerk, "and whatever else she needs for the road." "I don't need charity," Alara said, but her stomach betrayed her with a low, desperate growl. "Wasn't offering charity, was offering a meal." He turned back to her. "How long since you ate?" She didn't answer. "That's what I thought." He moved toward the door, then paused. You planning to stay in town? If I can find work. Domestic work? That's what I said. He nodded slowly, like he was making a decision. I've got a proposition for you. Might not be what you're looking for, but it's work, steady work, with room and board included. Every instinct Alara had learned in 8 years of running screamed at her to be careful. What kind of proposition? The kind we should discuss somewhere that's not the middle of a general store with half the town listening. He gestured to the door. I've got a ranch about 5 miles out. Come see it, hear the offer, then decide. If you don't like it, I'll bring you back to town. No harm done. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger. Fair enough. He extended his hand. Rowan Cade. I own the Rolling Sea, about 5 miles north. Been ranching this land for 12 years. Ask anyone in town, they'll tell you I'm a son of a bitch, but I'm an honest son of a bitch. Alara didn't take his hand. That's not the reassurance you think it is. He almost smiled. Probably not, but it's the truth, and that's worth something out here. He dropped his hand. Look, I'm not going to drag you anywhere. You want to come see the place? Come see it. You don't? That's fine too. But you're dead on your feet, and whatever you're running from is probably still a few days behind you. You could use a meal and a place to think without looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. How did he know she was running? But of course he knew. He'd probably thoroughly seen 100 women like her pass through this territory, all wearing the same haunted look, all trying to disappear into the frontier. Why do you need domestic help? She asked. Because my last housekeeper quit 6 weeks ago, and I'm down to eating beans out of a can and wearing shirts that should have been burned 3 months back. Why'd she quit? Ask her yourself if you want. She married a freight driver and moved to Oregon. What's the catch? There's always a catch, he agreed. But let's get some food in you before we discuss it. You're liable to make a bad decision on an empty stomach. The clerk returned with a cloth bundle, bread, cheese, some dried meat. Rowan took it and handed it to Alara. Eat while we ride. I've got a wagon out front. She should say no. Every piece of hard-won wisdom told her to walk away from men who made offers that sounded too good. Men who helped women in trouble. Men who looked at you like they could see straight through to the desperate core of you. But she was so tired and so hungry, and the thought of walking back out into that brutal sun with nowhere to go made something inside her crack just a little. If I don't like your offer, she said slowly, you bring me back to town. Tonight. Deal. And I keep the food either way. Fine. And if you try anything, I won't. His voice was flat, certain. I've got enough problems without adding woman who stabbed me to the list. It wasn't much of a guarantee, but it was more than she'd had an hour ago. All right, she said. Let's go. The ranch was not what Alara had expected. She'd pictured something rough, thrown together, the kind of place a man carved out of wilderness through sheer stubbornness. And maybe it had been that once. But what stood before her now was solid and deliberate. A 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn that looked newer than the house, corrals that were clean and well-maintained, and pastures that rolled out toward distant mountains under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. You built all this? She asked as Rowan helped her down from the wagon. Most of it. Bought the land 12 years ago when it was nothing but grass and rocks. Built the house first, then the barn, added on as I could afford it. He led her toward the house. It's not fancy, but it's sturdy. Survived 2 bad winters and a fire 3 years back. The interior was dim and surprisingly clean for a bachelor household, though she could see the signs of neglect, dust on the mantel, dishes stacked by the dry sink, a basket overflowing with mending. The furniture was simple but well made, and there was a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Sit, Rowan said, pointing to the table. I'll make coffee. Alara sat. She ate the bread and cheese slowly, forcing herself not to wolf it down, while Rowan moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to fend for himself. The coffee, when it came, was strong and hot, and exactly what she needed. So, she said when she'd eaten enough to think clearly. What's the proposition? Rowan settled into the chair across from her. He was quiet for a long moment, and Alara got the sense he was choosing his words carefully. I need a wife, he said finally. The bread turned to ash in her mouth. No. Hear me out. I said no. She stood up, the chair scraping harsh against the floor. I don't, sit down. It wasn't quite a command, but there was steel underneath. You said you'd hear the offer, so hear it. Against her better judgment, she sat. There's a man named Marcus Brennan, Rowan said. Owns the Big Sky Ranch, about 20 miles west of here. He's been trying to buy this land from me for 5 years. I've said no every time, and he's getting impatient. What does that have to do with territory law? Rowan interrupted. A married man with a family has stronger claim to his land than a single man, especially if there are disputes about water rights or boundary lines. Brennan's been pushing those disputes, trying to tie me up in legal challenges, make it expensive enough that I'll sell just to be done with it. So get a lawyer. I have a lawyer. Expensive bastard who tells me I'd have a better case if I was married and had roots that went deeper than just owning the deed. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. Look, I'm not asking you to. This isn't about. He stopped, started again. It would be a business arrangement, a legal marriage, but nothing more than that. You'd have your own room, your own space. I'd expect you to keep the house, help with the ranch work when needed, maybe come to town events where being seen together would matter. In exchange, you get steady work, fair wages, a roof over your head, and protection from whatever you're running from. You don't know what I'm running from. Don't need to know. Out here, everybody's running from something. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. This isn't romance, miss. I don't even know your last name. Quinn. Elara Quinn. Miss Quinn. This is survival, pure and simple. You need a place to disappear, and I need someone who can help me hold on to this land before Brennan finds a way to take it. There are other women from town, women from town want a real marriage. Kids, family, the whole picture. I can't offer that. His voice was flat. I had a wife once. Lost her and our daughter 6 years back. Fever took them both in the same week. I'm not looking to replace them. I'm looking for a partner who understands this is business. The grief in his voice was old and buried deep, but Elara heard it anyway. She understood that kind of loss, the kind that changed you, made you into someone who didn't quite fit in the world anymore. Why me? She asked. You don't know anything about me. I know you're desperate enough to consider this. I know you're running from something bad enough that you showed up in a nowhere town with holes in your boots and no money in your pocket. I know you're stubborn enough to tell a stranger no even when you're half dead from hunger. He shrugged. That's enough. It's insane. Maybe, but it solves both our problems. Elara looked around the kitchen, taking it in properly now. The sturdy walls, the good stove, the windows that let in light. She thought about the men in the alley in Helena, the way they'd smiled when they'd cornered her, the way they'd said her name like they owned it. She thought about the last 8 years, always moving, always afraid, always one step away from being found. What if I say no? She asked. Then I drive you back to town, like I promised. You find work somewhere else, and I keep fighting Brennan on my own. He met her eyes. But you should know. He's got connections. Sheriff's in his pocket, judge too. And he's not the kind of man who takes no gracefully. If you stay in this area and you're not under someone's protection, you're vulnerable. Is that a threat? It's a fact. His voice was grim. Brennan doesn't care who gets hurt when he wants something. He's already run off 2 families who had land he wanted. I'm the last holdout, and he's getting desperate, which means things are going to get ugly, probably soon. So you want to drag me into the middle of a range war? I want to give you a choice. Stay here, be protected, have a stake in something, or take your chances out there. He stood up, walked to the window, looked out at his land. It's not a great offer, I know that, but it's what I've got. Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table to still them. You said I'd have my own room? Yes. And fair wages? Yes. How much? He named a figure that was more than fair. It was generous, more than she'd made in 6 months at her last position. Why so much? Because this land is worth a hell of a lot more than that. And if you help me keep it, you'll have earned every penny. She should walk away. This was crazy. Marriage to a stranger, getting tangled up in some land dispute, tying herself to a place instead of keeping the freedom to run. It went against every survival instinct she'd honed. but she was so tired of running. I want it in writing, she said. The wages, the arrangement, all of it, a contract. Done. And if either of us wants out, we can get an annulment or a divorce, no arguments. Agreed. And you never... She stopped, made herself say it. You never touch me. Never come into my room. This is business, like you said. Something dark flickered across his face, but his voice stayed steady. You have my word. It wasn't enough. Words were cheap, and she'd learned that the hard way. But the alternative was walking back out into that merciless sun with nowhere to go and men on her trail who'd already killed once to keep her quiet. When? She asked. Sunset. There's a minister in town who owes me a favor. We can make it legal before the day's out. He turned from the window. I need an answer, Miss Quinn. This offer's only good until I drive you back to town. After that, I'll figure something else out. Alara closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, long dead, who used to tell her that sometimes the only choice was between bad and worse. She thought about the farmhouse in Ohio where she'd grown up, back when her name had been different and her life had been something other than fear. She thought about the man she'd witnessed murder someone in cold blood, the man who'd spent 8 years hunting her because she'd seen his face. When she opened her eyes, Rowan was watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy. All right, she said, I'll do it. He nodded once, like he'd expected this, like he'd known all along what her answer would be. We leave in an hour. That gives you time to wash up and find something better to wear. There's a trunk upstairs with my wife's old clothes. She was about your size. The mention of his dead wife sent a chill through her, but Alara didn't let it show. Fine. One more thing. He crossed to a cabinet, pulled out a small wooden box, and opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring. It was Sarah's. My wife. You should wear it. People will expect to see a ring. Alara stared at the ring, at the worn gold that had circled another woman's finger, another woman who died in this house. I can't. It's just metal, Rowan said, but his voice had gone rough. She's gone. This is just practical. Nothing about this was practical. Nothing about this made sense. But Alara reached out and took the ring anyway, felt the weight of it in her palm, the warmth of gold that had outlived its owner. All right, she said again, softer this time. All right, Rowan echoed. And just like that, her life changed direction. The dress fit better than Alara had expected. It was dark blue calico, simple and sturdy, with a high collar and long sleeves. Standing in front of the small mirror in the upstairs bedroom, Alara barely recognized herself. She looked respectable. She looked like someone who belonged in this house, in this life. She looked like a lie. The bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the front pasture. Rowan had been true to his word. This room was clearly meant to be hers, separate from the larger bedroom down the hall that she assumed was his. There was still time to change her mind. She could walk downstairs, tell Rowan she'd made a mistake, ask him to take her back to town. He'd honor his word. She believed that much about him. He was a hard man, probably a dangerous man, but he seemed to keep his promises. But then what? Where would she go? How long before the men tracking her showed up in Covenant Ridge, asking questions, showing her photograph? No. This was the right choice, the only choice. She found Rowan waiting by the wagon, already cleaned up and wearing what was probably his only good shirt. He looked uncomfortable, like a man dressed for a funeral instead of a wedding. Ready? He asked. No, she said honestly. But let's go anyway. The ride to town was quiet. Rowan kept his eyes on the road, and Alara watched the landscape roll by, the endless grass, the distant mountains, the sky that seemed to go on forever. It was beautiful and harsh in equal measure, this Montana territory. A place that could kill you or set you free, depending on luck and will. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they reached Covenant Ridge. Rowan drove straight to a small white church at the end of the main street and helped Alara down from the wagon. Wait here, he said, and disappeared inside. Alara stood in the dusty street, the gold ring heavy on her finger, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Probably. But she'd made worse decisions and survived them. Rowan emerged with a portly man in clerical garb who looked distinctly unhappy. "Miss Quinn," Rowan said, "this is Reverend Mitchell. He's agreed to perform the ceremony." "Agreed under protest," the Reverend muttered. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Cade. A marriage performed without banns, without family present, without proper—" "It's legal, though," Rowan interrupted. "That's all that matters. Legality and morality are not always—" "Reverend," Rowan's voice went cold. "I paid off your gambling debt to Marcus Brennan. That bought me a favor. This is me calling it in. Now, are you going to marry us, or do I need to remind Brennan that you still owe him money?" The Reverend's face flushed red, but he nodded stiffly. "Inside, then, quickly." The interior of the church was dim and smelled of old wood and candle wax. There were no flowers, no music, no guests, just the three of them standing at the altar while the Reverend opened his book and began to read in a voice devoid of warmth. Alara barely heard the words. She was focused on staying upright, on breathing steadily, on not thinking about what came after this. Rowan stood beside her, stiff and silent, his face carved from stone. "Do you, Rowan Cade, take this woman?" "I do. To be your lawfully wedded wife." "Already said I do." The Reverend shot him a dark look but continued. "And do you, Alara Quinn, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" This was it. Last chance to run. "I do," she said, and her voice didn't shake. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I pronounce you man and wife." The Reverend snapped his book shut. "Sign here." They signed. The Reverend signed. It was done. "Congratulations," the Reverend said, managing to make it sound like a curse. "May the union bring you whatever it is you're truly seeking." Rowan ignored him, guiding Alara back toward the door. They were almost outside when a voice called out from the street. "Well now, isn't this touching?" Alara's blood went cold. The man standing in the fading light was tall and well-dressed, with silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Three men flanked him, all wearing guns low on their hips. "Brennan," Rowan said, and his hand moved to his own gun. "Heard you were in town," Marcus Brennan said easily. "Didn't realize you were here for a wedding. Congratulations." His gaze slid to Alara, assessing and cold. "And who's the lucky bride?" "My wife," Rowan said. "Alara Cade." The name sounded strange in her ears, foreign, but she lifted her chin and met Brennan's stare without flinching. "How convenient," Brennan said. "Getting married right when I was planning to challenge your claim again, almost like you knew I was coming. Maybe I just got tired of eating my own cooking. Or maybe you heard I was filing papers to take your water rights." Brennan's smile sharpened. "Married or not, Cade, you're still going to lose that land. I've been patient, but my patience has limits." "Then I guess we'll see each other in court." "Oh, I don't think it'll come to that." Brennan's hand moved to his gun belt, a casual gesture that made Alara's heart hammer. "Accidents happen on ranches. People get hurt. Would be a shame if something happened to your new bride before she even saw her wedding night." Rowan moved faster than Alara would have thought possible. One moment he was beside her, the next he was inches from Brennan, his gun drawn and pressed against the other man's chest. "You threaten her again," Rowan said softly, "and I'll kill you right here in front of the church. I don't care who sees." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The three men with Brennan had their hands on their guns, but they were frozen, waiting to see what their boss would do. The Reverend had vanished back into the church. Alara stood paralyzed, watching this confrontation that had erupted out of nowhere, understanding with sudden clarity that this was what her life was now, violence simmering just beneath the surface, danger in every shadow. Then Brennan laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "You've got fire, Cade. I'll give you that, but fire burns out." He stepped back, and Rowan led him. "Enjoy your honeymoon. It might be the last peaceful night you get." He turned and walked away, his men following. Alara watched them go, her hands clenched so tight her nails drew blood. "That's Marcus Brennan," Rowan said unnecessarily. He holstered his gun. "That's what we're up against. You could have killed him. Could have. But then his men would have killed us, and the sheriff, who's in Brennan's pocket, would have ruled it justifiable homicide." He looked at her. "This is what I was talking about. It's going to get worse before it gets better." "I know." And she did. She'd spent 8 years looking over her shoulder, 8 years knowing that violence could find her any moment. This was just a different kind of danger. Let's go home. Home. The word tasted strange, but it was what this place was now, for better or worse. The house was dark when they returned. Rowan lit lamps while Alara stood in the kitchen, still wearing Sarah Cade's dress, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 6 hours. "Hungry?" Rowan asked. She shook her head. The bread and cheese from earlier sat heavy in her stomach. "Right." He moved around the kitchen, clearly uncomfortable. "Your room's upstairs, first door on the right. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash. I'll sleep down here tonight, give you some space to settle in." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but it's been a hell of a day, and I figure you could use some time alone." He paused. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Work out a routine, go over what needs doing around here. For tonight, just rest." Alara nodded. She was exhausted, but her mind was racing too fast for sleep. "Rowan?" He looked at her. "What happens when Brennan comes back? 'Cause he will come back." "I know." His face was grim in the lamplight. "And when he does, we'll deal with it. Together." He gestured at her hand where the gold ring gleamed. "That's what the ring means now. We face whatever comes as a team." It wasn't a romantic declaration. It wasn't even particularly reassuring. But there was something solid in his voice, something she could hold on to. "All right," she said. "Get some sleep, Alara." He turned away, started banking the fire. Morning comes early on a ranch. Alara climbed the stairs to her new room, closed the door, and finally let herself fall apart just a little. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in Sarah's dress, and pressed her hands against her face. She was married. To a stranger. To a hard-eyed rancher with a dead wife and a powerful enemy, and land that was worth killing for. She'd run from one danger straight into another, but this time, maybe, she wouldn't have to run anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Alara lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, and tried to convince herself that she'd made the right choice. She was still trying when sleep finally came. The rooster woke her before dawn. Alara jolted upright, disoriented, her heart hammering until she remembered where she was. The small room, the narrow bed, the gold ring still on her finger. She'd fallen asleep in Sarah's dress, and now it was twisted around her legs, cutting off circulation. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house. Silence. Maybe Rowan was still asleep downstairs. Maybe he'd already left. She had no idea what a rancher's schedule looked like, no idea what was expected of her today, no idea how to be a wife to a man she didn't know. The water in the pitcher was cold but clean. She washed her face and hands, tried to smooth the wrinkles from the dress, gave up. Her hair was a disaster. She did what she could with her fingers, then went downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but there was fresh coffee on the stove and a plate of biscuits on the table. Through the window she could see Rowan in the barn, moving between the stalls. He'd been up for hours, probably. Alara poured herself coffee and ate one of the biscuits. It was good. Better than good. Dense and buttery, with a hint of salt. He'd made these himself this morning, which meant he'd been up well before dawn. She felt a twinge of guilt for sleeping in. The back door opened and Rowan came in carrying a bucket of milk. He stopped when he saw her, like he'd forgotten she was here. "Morning?" he said. "Morning." They stared at each other for an awkward beat. Then Rowan set the bucket on the counter and washed his hands in the basin. "There's eggs if you want them," he said. "Chickens are behind the barn. Help yourself." "I can make breakfast," Alara offered. "For both of us." "Already ate. Been up since 4. He dried his hands on a towel. "But you should eat. Going to be a long day." "What needs doing?" He looked at her like he was trying to figure out if she was serious. "You ever worked a ranch before?" "No." "Didn't think so." He poured himself more coffee. "All right, first thing. Can you actually cook, or was that just something you said to get work?" "I can cook." "Good. I've got 3 ranch hands who come in for meals, breakfast and dinner. Lunch, they're on their own. That's going to be your job from here on out. Cooking, cleaning, mending, all the household work. Beyond that, there's chickens to feed, eggs to collect, garden to maintain, and depending on what's happening, I might need extra hands with the stock." "What kind of stock?" Cattle. About 200 head, give or take, plus horses, pigs, chickens. It's not the biggest operation, but it keeps us fed. He leaned against the counter. The men know you're here. They know we got married yesterday. They're going to have questions. What should I tell them? Nothing. That's our business, not theirs. His voice was flat. But they're going to look at you. Try to figure out what kind of woman marries a stranger. Best thing you can do is work hard and ignore the talk. There's already talk? There's always talk. Small territory. People don't have much else to do. He set his cup down. They'll say I hired a mail-order bride. They'll say you're running from the law. They'll say whatever makes for good gossip. Let them. Alara felt her face flush. I'm not running from the law. Didn't say you were. But you're running from something, and that's going to make people curious. He met her eyes. I don't care what you're running from, long as it doesn't bring trouble to my door. If it does, I need to know now. She thought about the man in Ohio, the one who'd killed his business partner over a deal gone wrong. The one she'd seen standing over the body with a gun still smoking. The one who'd looked up and seen her watching through the window. It won't bring trouble, she said, and hoped that was true. Rowan studied her for another moment, then nodded. All right, then we don't talk about it. He moved toward the door. Men'll be here for breakfast at 6. That gives you about 2 hours. There's bacon in the cold cellar, flour in the pantry, whatever else you need. Make enough to feed 4 grown men who've been working since dawn. Wait, what time is it now? 4:15. You said breakfast is at 6. That's right. Then I have less than 2 hours, not... She stopped, calculated. Never mind. He almost smiled. You'll figure it out. And Alara, she looked at him. Don't burn the bacon. The men'll complain for a week. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the kitchen with 2 hours to prove she could handle this. She got to work. The cold cellar was dug into the hillside behind the house, cool and dark and smelling of earth. She found bacon, butter wrapped in cloth, a crock of lard, jars of preserves. Back in the kitchen, she started a fire in the stove, mixed biscuit dough while the oven heated, sliced bacon thick the way her mother had taught her a lifetime ago. By the time the sun started to rise, she had bacon frying, biscuits in the oven, eggs scrambling in a cast iron pan. The kitchen was hot and smoky, and her hands were shaking from nerves, but the food smelled right. At 6 o'clock exactly, boots sounded on the porch. 3 men came in behind Rowan, pulling off their hats, wiping mud from their feet. They were younger than she'd expected. 2 of them barely looked 20, and the third couldn't have been much older than 25. They stopped short when they saw her. Boys, Rowan said, this is Alara, my wife. Alara, this is Tom, Jack, and Miguel. They work the ranch. Ma'am. Tom was the youngest, with red hair and a face full of freckles. He couldn't seem to stop staring. Pleased to meet you, Jack said. He had dark hair and a cautious smile. Miguel just nodded. He was lean and weathered, with careful eyes that didn't miss much. Sit, Alara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Food's ready. They sat. She brought plates piled high, bacon, biscuits, eggs, preserves. The men ate like they were starving, which maybe they were. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes except to ask for more coffee or pass the butter. Finally, Tom broke the silence. These are good biscuits, ma'am. Thank you. Better than Rowan's, Jack added, then looked nervous like he'd said something wrong. Rowan snorted. My biscuits kept you alive for 6 weeks. Show some respect. We're showing respect, Miguel said quietly. We're saying hers are better. Alara hid her smile and poured more coffee. The tension in the room eased slightly. The men went back to eating, and she caught snatches of their conversation, something about fence repairs in the north pasture, a cow that was due to calf any day, concerns about the creek running low. When they finished, they brought their plates to the sink without being asked and filed back outside. Miguel was the last to leave. He paused at the door and looked at Alara. Welcome to the rolling sea, he said. Then quieter, he's a good man. Hard, but good. You could do worse. Before she could respond, he was gone. Rowan lingered, refilling his coffee cup. You did all right. They seem nice. They're good workers. Tom talks too much, Jack's lazy with the mending, and Miguel's got a temper, but they're loyal. He hesitated. They'll look out for you if trouble comes. I've already told them to. What kind of trouble? The kind that wears expensive suits and thinks he owns the territory. Rowan set his cup down. Brennan's not going to let this go. The marriage was a tactical move, but it's not going to stop him. He'll look for other ways to pressure us. Like what? Like showing up when I'm not here, like making threats, like trying to scare you into leaving. His jaw tightened. Don't go anywhere alone. Not to town, not to the creek, nowhere. If you need something, take one of the men with you. You're serious. Dead serious. Brennan's already sent men to rough up neighbors who wouldn't sell. One family's barn burned down last month. Sheriff said it was an accident, but everybody knows better. He looked at her. You signed on for this. I need to know you understand what that means. Ilara thought about the years of running, the night she'd slept with a knife under her pillow, the constant weight of fear. I understand. Good. He moved toward the door. I'll be working the South Range today. Miguel's staying close to the house, fixing the barn roof. You need anything? He'll be around. Then he was gone, and Ilara was alone with a sink full of dishes and a whole day stretching ahead of her. She washed the dishes. She swept the floors. She found the mending basket and started working through it, torn shirts, frayed cuffs, missing buttons. Her hands remembered the rhythm of the needle, the careful stitches her mother had taught her. Outside, she could hear Miguel hammering on the barn roof, the steady rhythm oddly comforting. Around noon, a wagon rolled up the drive. Ilara watched from the window as a woman climbed down, older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She marched up to the door and knocked hard enough to rattle the frame. Ilara opened it. You must be the new Mrs. Cade, the woman said. I'm Dorothy Hayes. I own the property 2 miles east. Heard Rowan got himself married and figured I'd come see what kind of fool woman would take him on. It wasn't exactly a friendly greeting, but there was something in the woman's eyes that wasn't hostile either. More like curious, testing. Ilara, she said, would you like to come in? Don't mind if I do. Dorothy swept past her into the kitchen, looked around with a critical eye, keeping the place cleaner than he did at least. Man's hopeless with a broom. Can I offer you coffee? You can offer me answers. Dorothy sat at the table without waiting for an invitation. Whole territories buzzing about how Rowan Cade showed up in town yesterday with a woman nobody had ever seen and married her before sunset. People are saying all kinds of things. I'm sure they are. So what's the truth? Ilara poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. The truth is, it's nobody's business but ours. Dorothy's eyebrows went up. Then she laughed, sharp and surprised. Fair enough. You've got spine. I'll give you that. She took a sip of coffee. You know what you're getting into with this place? With Rowan? Some of it. Then let me fill in the rest. Rowan's been fighting Marcus Brennan for 5 years over water rights and boundary disputes. Brennan wants this land because it's got the best water access in 50 miles. Without it, his cattle operation can't expand, and Brennan's the kind of man who thinks he deserves to own everything he can see. She set her cup down. He's dangerous. He's got money, power, and no conscience, and he's made it clear he'll do whatever it takes to get what he wants. Rowan told me. Did he tell you what happened to his wife and daughter? Ilara went still. He said they died. Fever. That's what the death certificates say. Dorothy's voice went hard. But Sarah didn't get sick until after she'd been to town, after she'd had a confrontation with one of Brennan's men at the general store. They got into it over something stupid. She accused him of cutting in line. He got aggressive. She didn't back down. 2 days later, she and the little girl both came down with fever, dead within a week. You think Brennan? I think it's mighty convenient timing. I think Sarah Cade was healthy as a horse, and then suddenly she and her daughter are both dead from the same illness nobody else caught. Dorothy leaned forward. I can't prove anything. Nobody can. But Rowan believes it, and that's why he's so set on holding this land. It's not just about property anymore. It's about justice. Or revenge. Maybe both. Ilara's coffee had gone cold. She pushed it away. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know what you married into, and because if you're smart, you'll watch your back. Dorothy stood up. I like Rowan. He's been a good neighbor, but he's carrying a lot of anger, and men with that much rage inside them can be unpredictable. You be careful, hear me? I hear you? Good. Dorothy moved toward the door, then paused. If you need help, real help, you come to my place. Day or night, doesn't matter. I've got a shotgun and I know how to use it. And unlike the sheriff, I'm not in Brennan's pocket. Thank you. After Dorothy left, Elara sat at the table for a long time, processing everything she'd just learned. Rowan hadn't just lost his wife and daughter, he thought they'd been murdered. And he'd married Elara not just to secure his land claim, but as part of a larger fight against the man who might have killed his family. She'd walked into the middle of something darker and more complicated than she'd realized. The question was, did she stay anyway? She looked around the kitchen at the clean floors and the mended clothes hanging on a line by the stove. She thought about the bacon she'd cooked that morning, the way the men had eaten like they were grateful, the way Miguel had said welcome like he meant it. She thought about Ohio, about running, about the last 8 years of her life spent looking over her shoulder. At least here, she wasn't running alone. The afternoon passed slowly. Elara cleaned out the cold cellar, organized the pantry, started planning meals for the week. Around 4 o'clock, she heard riders coming up the road. Too many riders, too fast. She went to the window and felt her stomach drop. 5 men on horseback, all wearing guns. Marcus Brennan was in the lead, looking relaxed and confident as he reined in by the barn. Miguel appeared from around the side of the house, rifle in hand. Get back inside, Mrs. Cade. But Elara was already moving toward the door. If they were here to threaten her, she wanted to face them standing up. She stepped onto the porch as Brennan dismounted. His men stayed on their horses, hands near their weapons. Mrs. Cade, Brennan said, touching the brim of his hat. What a pleasure. I wanted to stop by and offer my congratulations. Heard you had quite the whirlwind courtship. What do you want? Elara kept her voice level. Just being neighborly. Wanted to make sure you knew who's who around here. He smiled, all teeth and no warmth. See, your husband's got a reputation for being stubborn. Won't sell when it makes good business sense. Won't compromise when everyone else can see it's the smart move. I'd hate to see his stubbornness rub off on you. If you've got business with my husband, come back when he's here. Oh, I think you and I can have a conversation without him. Brennan took a step closer to the porch. Miguel raised his rifle slightly, a warning. Brennan ignored him. Here's the thing, Mrs. Cade. You're new here, you don't know the history, but this land your husband's so attached to, it should have been mine 5 years ago. I made him a fair offer. He turned it down out of spite. Or maybe he just didn't want to sell. Maybe. But things have a way of changing. People who thought they wanted to stay somewhere suddenly decide it's not worth the trouble, especially when trouble starts finding them. His smile widened. You seem like a smart woman, smart enough to know when you're in over your head. I'm smart enough to know when I'm being threatened. Threatened? Brennan's voice dripped false innocence. I'm just stating facts. This is rough country. Accidents happen. Fires, stampedes, people falling from horses and breaking their necks. He paused. People getting sick with fevers that come out of nowhere. The air went cold. Miguel moved forward, rifle now aimed directly at Brennan. You need to leave. Now. Easy, Miguel. Brennan held up his hands. I'm going. But Mrs. Cade, you think about what I said. Ask your husband about his first wife. Ask him if holding on to this land is worth watching another woman die. He remounted and rode off, his men following. They didn't hurry. They knew they'd made their point. Elara stood on the porch, shaking with rage and fear, until they disappeared down the road. Miguel lowered his rifle. You all right? He asked. No. Her voice came out raw. But I will be. Rowan needs to know about this. I'll tell him when he gets back. She looked at Miguel. Does he do this often? Show up when Rowan's gone? First time he's come to the house, usually he just sends his men. Miguel's face was grim. He's escalating, testing to see how far he can push. What happens if he pushes too far? Then people die, and Brennan makes sure it can't be traced back to him. Miguel met her eyes. You should be scared, Mrs. Cade. But don't let that fear make you stupid. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't trust anyone who works for Brennan. And if you get a chance to leave, to get out of this mess, you take it. Rowan's paying me to stay. There are some things money can't fix. This might be one of them. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone on the porch with Brennan's threats still ringing in her ears. When Rowan finally came home near sunset, dusty and exhausted, Alara was waiting at the table with cold coffee and clenched fists. "We need to talk," she said. He took one look at her face and knew something had happened. "What?" She told him everything: Brennan's visit, his threats, the way he'd smiled when he talked about Sarah's death. Rowan's expression went from concern to furious to something darker that Alara didn't have a name for. "He came here," Rowan said quietly, "to my house, while I was gone." "Yes." "And he threatened you." "He was careful about it. Nothing explicit, just implications." Rowan stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the darkening land. His hands were shaking. "I should kill him. I should ride to his ranch right now and put a bullet in his head." "That's what he wants. He's pushing you to do something that'll get you arrested or killed." Alara stood too. "Dorothy Hayes came by earlier. She told me about Sarah, about what you think happened." Rowan went very still. "Did she? Is it true? Do you think Brennan killed your wife and daughter?" "I don't think. I know." He turned to face her. "I can't prove it, but I know. Sarah went to town, had that confrontation, and 2 days later she's dead. The doctor said it was fever, but the symptoms were wrong. She deteriorated too fast. And Emma, she was only 4 years old, strong as hell, and she went down just as quick." His voice cracked. "I've spent 6 years trying to find proof, trying to find someone who'd testify against Brennan, and I've got nothing. He's too careful, too protected. So what are you going to do?" "What I've been doing. Hold this land, make it cost him. Make sure he knows that some things can't be bought or scared away." He looked at her. "I'm sorry. I brought you into this, and now you're in danger because of me." "I was already in danger. At least here I know who the enemy is." Alara moved closer. "But I need to know, are you trying to hold on to this land, or are you trying to get revenge?" "Both." "That's honest, at least." "I don't know how to be anything else." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, if you want out, if this is too much, I'll honor our agreement. I'll pay you what we discussed and help you get somewhere safe. You don't owe me anything." It was the second time he'd offered her an escape, and it was tempting. Walk away from this mess, find some quiet town where nobody was trying to kill anybody, start over one more time. But she was tired of starting over, tired of running, tired of being alone. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Alara, I'm not leaving," she repeated, stronger this time. "You gave me a roof over my head when I had nothing. You kept your word about the arrangement, and more than that—" She stopped, chose her words carefully. "I've spent 8 years afraid, 8 years letting fear make all my decisions. If I run now, I'll still be afraid. I'll still be running, and I'm done with that." Rowan stared at her like he was trying to figure out if she meant it. "You could die here." "I could die anywhere. At least here, I'll die standing my ground." She managed a thin smile. "Besides, I made good biscuits this morning. Be ashamed to waste that skill." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both." "Yeah." He almost smiled back. "Probably." They stood there in the fading light, two people who barely knew each other, bound together by a hasty marriage and a common enemy. It wasn't romance, it wasn't even friendship yet. But it was something. "All right," Rowan said finally. "Then we do this together, but we do it smart. No more working alone, no more taking chances. Brennan wants a fight, we'll give him one. But on our terms, not his." "Agreed." "And Alara," he met her eyes. "Thank you. For staying." She nodded, not trusting her voice. That night she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the house settle around her. Somewhere downstairs, Rowan was probably awake too, planning his next move, thinking about his dead wife, wondering if he'd made a mistake bringing another woman into this war. Maybe he had. Maybe they'd both made mistakes. But for the first time in 8 years, Alara felt like she was part of something bigger than just survival. She was part of a fight, And even if it was crazy, even if it was dangerous, even if it might kill her, at least she was finally fighting back. She fell asleep with her hand on the gold ring and her mind full of plans. The next 3 weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, if you ignored the loaded rifles by every door and the way Rowan never went anywhere without checking the horizon first. Alara learned the ranch the way someone learns a new language, through immersion and mistakes. She burned the first batch of bread she tried to make from scratch. She collected eggs and got pecked bloody by a temperamental hen Tom had named Lucille. She attempted to help Miguel mend a fence and nearly put a nail through her hand. But she kept trying, and slowly the work became easier. The men warmed to her. Tom started leaving wildflowers on the kitchen windowsill. Nothing romantic, just a kid's awkward attempt at kindness. Jack taught her how to tell which cows were due to calf by the way they separated from the herd. Miguel showed her how to shoot, setting up bottles on fence posts and correcting her stance until she could hit 3 out of 5 at 20 yards. "Not bad," he said after a particularly good round. "But don't get cocky. Bottles don't shoot back." Rowan watched these lessons from a distance, never commenting. But Alara caught something in his expression that might have been approval. They were careful around each other, she and Rowan. Polite. They worked side by side during the day, him handling the heavy ranch work, her managing the house and helping where she could. At night they ate dinner together while he told her about the cattle, about which pastures needed rotating, about a dispute with a neighboring rancher over a stray bull. She told him about the supplies they were running low on, about the leak in the roof over the back bedroom, about Dorothy's invitation to a church social next month. They didn't talk about Brennan, but his presence hung over everything like smoke. Then, on a Thursday morning 4 weeks after the wedding, everything changed. Alara was in the kitchen kneading dough when she heard horses. Not the familiar sound of the ranch hands coming in for a meal. This was faster, urgent. She wiped flour from her hands and went to the window. A man she didn't recognize was dismounting near the barn, his horse lathered with sweat. Rowan came out to meet him, and even from a distance, Alara could see the tension in the stranger's posture. She was halfway to the door when Rowan came in, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where Brennan's men just cut our fence on the North Range and stampeded about 50 head of cattle onto his property." He grabbed his rifle from above the door. "I need to go deal with this." "I'm coming with you." "No." "You said no more working alone. That applies to you too." "Alara, this could get ugly. Then you'll need backup." She was already reaching for the rifle Miguel had taught her to shoot. "Besides, if his men are on the North Range, they're not here, which means the house is vulnerable." Rowan stopped, processed that. "You're right. Miguel, you stay with her. Tom, Jack, you're with me. We're going to get those cattle back and have a conversation with whoever's watching them." "What kind of conversation?" Jack asked nervously. "The kind that involves making sure they understand property lines." Rowan looked at Alara. "Keep the doors locked. Anyone shows up who's not one of us, you shoot first and ask questions later." "Understood." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, then just nodded and headed out. Alara watched through the window as the 3 men rode north, pushing their horses hard. Miguel checked the rifle, made sure it was loaded, then took up position by the front window. "You know how to use that thing?" Alara held up the rifle he'd taught her on. "You tell me." Knowing how and being willing to are different things. "If someone tries to burn this house down, I'll be willing." He almost smiled. "Good. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The morning dragged on. Alara tried to work, finishing the bread, starting laundry, anything to keep her hands busy, but her attention kept drifting to the windows, to the horizon, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Around noon, she saw the dust cloud. "Miguel." He was already at the window, rifle raised. "I see it." 2 riders coming fast from the east. Not Rowan's group, they'd gone north. Alara's heart hammered as the riders got closer, close enough to identify. One was a woman. The other was Dorothy Hayes. Miguel lowered his rifle. "It's all right. I know her." Alara opened the door as Dorothy reined in hard, her horse dancing sideways. The woman with her was younger, maybe 30, with blonde hair and a split lip that was swelling badly. "We need help. Dorothy said, already dismounting. "This is Ann Pritchard. Her husband's ranch is 10 miles west. Brennan's men showed up this morning and beat him half to death." "Where is he now?" Miguel asked. "Still at their place. Ann rode to me. We came here." Dorothy helped the other woman down. Ann was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "They said if he didn't sign over his water rights, they'd come back and finish the job." Alara guided Ann inside, sat her at the table. The woman's dress was torn, and there were bruises forming on her arms. "Did they hurt you?" "They tried." Ann's voice was raw. "James fought them off me, but they beat him with rifle butts, and then they just left him there bleeding." Tears started streaming down her face. "I didn't know where else to go. Sheriff won't help. He works for Brennan. I thought maybe Rowan's dealing with his own crisis right now," Miguel said. "Brennan hit the rolling sea this morning, too. Stampeded cattle, cut fences." Dorothy swore. "He's making his move, hitting everyone at once so we can't help each other." "How many ranches?" Alara asked. "At least 3 that I know of. Maybe more." Dorothy looked at Miguel. "Where's Rowan?" "North Range, getting his cattle back." "Then we need to get word to him. He needs to know this is bigger than just his property." Dorothy turned to Alara. "You got medical supplies here?" "Some. Bandages, whiskey, needle, and thread." "Good. Ann, you're going to tell me exactly where James is and what condition he was in when you left. Then we're going to figure out how to help him without getting ourselves killed." The next hour was chaos. Dorothy rode to the Pritchard place with Tom, who Rowan had left behind to help with fence repairs before the crisis hit. Miguel sent Jack to find Rowan and tell him what was happening. Alara stayed with Ann, cleaning her wounds, making her eat something, listening to her talk about the men who'd shown up at dawn with guns and demands. "They said Brennan owns the judge," Ann said quietly. "Said even if we went to court, we'd lose. Said we might as well sign now and save ourselves the trouble." She looked at Alara with hollow eyes. "Is that true? Does he own everyone?" "Not everyone," Alara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Dorothy's not in his pocket. Rowan's not. There are still people willing to fight. And how many of them are dead because of it?" Alara didn't have an answer to that. By the time Rowan came back, it was late afternoon. He looked like he'd been through a battle, dusty, exhausted, with a cut above his eye that was still bleeding sluggishly. Jack and Dorothy were with him, along with Tom, who looked shaken. "We got the cattle back," Rowan said without preamble, "but Brennan's men were waiting for us. There was a fight." "Anyone hurt?" Alara asked. "Couple of his men won't be riding for a while. We're fine." He looked at Ann. "Dorothy filled me in. How's your husband?" "Alive. Barely." Ann's voice was steady now, hardened by anger. "They broke his arm and cracked some ribs. Dorothy thinks he'll make it, but he can't work the ranch like this." Rowan nodded slowly. "He's not the only one. I stopped at the Mitchell place on the way back. They got hit too. Barns half burned, horses scattered. Brennan's moving on everyone who won't sell." "So what do we do?" Tom asked. "We can't fight all his men. There's too many." "We don't fight them directly. We outthink them." Rowan looked around the room. "Dorothy, how many ranchers in this area would stand with us if we organized?" "Maybe 6, 7 families. Not everyone's willing to risk it." "6 is enough. We pool resources, take turns watching each other's properties, make sure nobody's alone when Brennan's men come calling." He turned to Miguel. "Can you get word out? Quietly?" "I can try." "Do it. Tell them to meet here tomorrow night. We'll figure out a plan." Rowan looked at Ann. "Your husband's welcome to stay at the Hayes place until he heals. You both are. Don't go back to your ranch alone." "What about our cattle, our land?" "We'll watch it. Between all of us, we can cover the territory." His voice was hard. "Brennan wants to divide us, pick us off one by one. We're not going to let him." After everyone left, Alara found Rowan on the porch, staring out at the darkening land. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but he hadn't cleaned it yet. "You should let me look at that," she said. "It's fine." "It's still bleeding. Sit down." He sat. She brought water and clean cloth, tilted his face toward the lamplight. The cut wasn't deep, but it would scar. She cleaned it carefully while he sat very still. You could have been killed today, she said quietly. Could have. Wasn't. That's not the reassurance you think it is. I'm still standing. That's all the reassurance I've got. He was quiet for a moment. Brennan made a mistake today. He hit too many people at once. Now they're scared and angry, and that's going to work in our favor. Or it's going to get more people hurt. Maybe. Probably. He looked at her. You want to leave now? I won't blame you. This is going to get worse before it gets better. You keep offering me an out. Why? Because you deserve one. You signed on for a business arrangement, not a war. Maybe war was always part of the arrangement. Elara finished cleaning the cut. I'm not leaving, Rowan. Stop asking. Something flickered in his eyes. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. Why? Why stay when you could walk away? Because I'm tired of walking away. Because for the first time in 8 years, I'm not just running, I'm standing for something. She met his gaze. And because you're not the only one with unfinished business. I spent 8 years afraid of a man who thought he could control me through fear. I'm done being afraid. Who was he, the man you were running from? She'd known this question would come eventually. His name was Richard Vance. He owned a factory in Ohio. I worked there as a bookkeeper. The words came slowly, like pulling thorns. One night I was working late, and I saw him kill his business partner, shot him in the head over a contract dispute. He looked up and saw me watching through the window. Rowan went very still. And? And he sent men after me. I ran, changed my name, moved from town to town, stayed ahead of them for 8 years. She swallowed hard. The men who cornered me in Helena, the day before I met you, they were his. They'd finally tracked me down. Are they still looking? I don't know, maybe. But I'm done running from them too. She stood up, put distance between them. So no, I'm not leaving. I'm staying, and I'm fighting, and if Brennan or Vance or anyone else wants to come after me, let them try. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed to where she was standing, and did something unexpected. He offered his hand. Partners then, he said. For real this time. Not just a business arrangement. Elara looked at his hand, calloused and scarred from years of hard work, still bruised from today's fight. She took it. Partners, she agreed. His grip was warm and solid, and for just a moment she felt something shift between them, the first crack in the careful walls they'd both built. The meeting the next night drew more people than Elara expected. 8 ranching families crowded into the house, plus Dorothy and a few ranch hands from neighboring properties. The kitchen and front room were packed with tense, angry people who all had stories about Brennan's harassment. Rowan stood by the fireplace and laid it out plain. Brennan's trying to break us individually. He's counting on us being too scared or too proud to work together. So here's what we're going to do. We organize. We create a schedule where someone's always watching the properties Brennan's targeted. We share resources. We document every threat, every attack, every illegal move his men make. Document for who? Asked a rancher named Carlson. Judge is in his pocket. Sheriff too. Who's going to care about our documentation? Territorial Governor's Office in Helena, Dorothy said. I've got connections there. If we can build a strong enough case, show a pattern of violence and intimidation, they'll have to investigate. That could take months, another rancher protested. Then we hold out for months, Suam. Rowan's voice cut through the murmurs. Look, I know it's not perfect, but it's better than sitting on our land alone waiting for them to burn us out. Some of us can't afford to wait, Ann Pritchard said quietly. My husband can't work. We can't defend our property and make money at the same time. So we help each other. Your place needs work done. We send hands over. Someone needs supplies. We pool money. Rowan looked around the room. This only works if we're committed, all of us. No backing out when things get hard. There was silence. Then Miguel spoke up. I'm in. Me too, Tom added. One by one, the families agreed. Not everyone was happy about it. Elara could see the doubt on some faces, the fear, but they all understood that alone, they were vulnerable. Together, they had a chance. After the meeting, as people were leaving, a man Elara didn't recognize approached Rowan. He was older, maybe 60, with sharp eyes and the careful posture of someone used to being cautious. Mr. Cade, might I have a word? You are? William Garrett. I own the land south of Brennan's property. I didn't speak up during the meeting because what I have to say is delicate. Rowan gestured to the kitchen. In here. Alara started to leave, but Garrett said, Your wife should hear this too. It concerns her. That got Rowan's attention. Go on. Garrett pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I received this 2 days ago. It's a letter from a law firm in Helena, inquiring about a woman named Alara Quinn. They're offering a substantial reward for information about her whereabouts. Alara's blood turned to ice. Garrett looked at her with something like sympathy. The letter says you're wanted as a witness in a murder case. A man named Richard Vance was killed in Ohio 6 months ago, and you're the key witness. Vance is dead? The words came out strangled. According to this letter, yes. Shot in his office under circumstances similar to the murder you witnessed. The firm represents his widow, and they need your testimony to prosecute the man they believe killed him. Rowan moved closer to Alara, a protective gesture. Who else knows about this letter? Just me. And I won't tell anyone. I'm not in the business of collecting bounties on frightened women. Garrett handed the paper to Alara. But others might not be so principled. If this firm is sending letters to every town in the territory, someone's going to make the connection eventually. Alara stared at the letter, at the official letterhead, at the description of a woman matching her appearance. 8 years of running, and Vance had found a way to haunt her, even from the grave. Why are you telling us this? Rowan asked. Because you're organizing resistance against Brennan, and I want you to know Brennan's not your only problem. If word gets out that there's a reward for information about Mrs. Cade, someone's going to sell her out. Probably someone in this room tonight. Garrett moved toward the door. Watch your backs, both of you. After he left, Alara sank into a chair, still holding the letter. This doesn't make sense. If Vance is dead, why would they need me? Because you're the only witness to the first murder, Rowan said. The one you saw. If they can prove he killed his partner, they can probably build a stronger case for whoever killed him. Or they're lying. Maybe Vance isn't dead at all. Maybe this is just another way to flush me out. Either way, you're not safe here anymore. I'm not safe anywhere. She crumpled the letter. If I run again, I'll always be running. And if I go back to testify, I'm putting myself in Vance's reach, or his allies' reach. So what do you want to do? It was a simple question with no simple answer. Alara thought about the last 8 years, about every town she'd fled from, every name she'd used. She thought about this ranch, this man who'd given her shelter, these people who'd welcomed her even though they knew she was running from something. I want to write to this law firm, she said finally. Find out if Vance is really dead. Find out what they actually want from me. And then I'll decide. That's risky. If you contact them, you're confirming you exist. I've been hiding for 8 years, Rowan. I'm done being invisible. She stood up. Besides, we've got bigger problems right now. Brennan's escalating, and if we don't stop him soon, it won't matter whether Vance is alive or dead. We'll all be dead or burned out. Rowan studied her for a long moment. You're sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. He almost smiled. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. You keep saying that like it's one or the other. This time he did smile, brief and unexpected. Fair point. That night Alara wrote the letter. She kept it short, factual, demanding proof that Vance was actually dead before she'd consider cooperating. She signed her real name for the first time in 8 years, sealed the envelope, and gave it to Dorothy to mail from the next town over, just in case someone in Covenant Ridge was watching the post office. 3 days later, Brennan made his next move. Alara woke to Miguel pounding on her door, shouting that the barn was on fire. She threw on clothes and ran outside. The barn was fully engulfed, flames shooting 30 feet high, lighting up the night sky. Rowan and the hands were already fighting it, hauling water from the well, but it was hopeless. The fire was too big, too hot, spreading too fast. Get the horses out, Rowan shouted. Alara ran toward the barn, but Miguel grabbed her. Too dangerous, it's coming down. And it was. Even as she watched, part of the roof collapsed inward with a roar of flame and sparks. The horses were screaming inside, terrified, and there was nothing they could do. Tom ran out leading 2 horses, their eyes rolling white with panic. Jack followed with 1 more. But there were 6 horses in that barn, and the heat was too intense now to go back in. Rowan stood there, fists clenched, watching his barn burn, watching everything inside it turn to ash. By dawn, it was over. The barn was a smoking ruin. 3 horses dead, tack and tools and months of stored hay, all gone. The men from neighboring ranches started showing up as soon as they saw the smoke. Dorothy arrived with Ann Pritchard. They stood in a grim circle, staring at the destruction. "This was Brennan," Dorothy said flatly. "Had to be." "We don't know that," Carlson said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Who else would it be?" Rowan's voice was dangerous. "This is what he does. Threatens, intimidates, and when that doesn't work, he burns you out. Then we go to the sheriff. The sheriff works for him. You know that." Rowan turned away from the ruins. "We're done playing defense. It's time to hit back." "And do what?" Miguel asked. "Burn his barn? That just makes us the same as him." "No, we find proof. Real proof that he's behind this, behind all of it. And we take it to Helena ourselves. Force the territorial governor to act." "How do we get proof when his men are too scared to talk?" Alara had been quiet, thinking. Now she spoke up. "We catch them in the act." Everyone turned to look at her. "They're escalating," she said. "First cattle, then beatings, now arson. They're getting bolder. So we give them a target they can't resist, and we're waiting when they come." "You want to set a trap," Dorothy said slowly. "Yes." Rowan was watching her with an unreadable expression. "That's dangerous." "Everything's dangerous now. At least this way we're the ones controlling it." Alara looked around at the assembled group. "We pick a property, one that's isolated enough that Brennan's men will think they can hit it without witnesses. We make it look vulnerable. And when they come, we catch them. We document everything, and we have leverage." "They'll have guns," Jack said nervously. "So will we." There was a long silence. Then Rowan nodded. "It could work, but we'd need to be smart about it, plan every detail. And we'd need someone whose property they want badly enough to risk another attack," Miguel added. Everyone looked at Rowan. "This land," Dorothy said, "it's still the most valuable because of the water access. If they think you're weak after the barn fire, they might make another move soon." Rowan looked at the smoking ruins, then at his house, then at Alara. She saw him weighing the risk, calculating odds, making the same kind of desperate calculation they'd both made that first day. "All right," he said. "We do it. But we do it right. No mistakes. No one gets hurt, if we can help it." They spent the rest of the day planning. By sunset, they had a strategy that was probably crazy but might actually work. And for the first time since the barn fire, Alara felt something other than fear. She felt ready. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. They spent 3 days making the ranch look vulnerable. Rowan sent Tom and Jack to work Dorothy's property, leaving only Miguel visibly present during daylight hours. They made a show of it in town, Rowan complaining loudly at the general store about being short-handed, about the barn fire setting him back months, about maybe having to sell after all if things didn't turn around. Word would get back to Brennan. It always did. Meanwhile, the other ranchers took positions in the hills surrounding the property, hidden among the rocks and scrub pine where they could watch without being seen. Dorothy had a hunting rifle and knew how to use it. Carlson brought his 2 oldest sons. Even Ann Pritchard insisted on coming, still wearing bruises from her last encounter with Brennan's men. "I want to see their faces when we catch them," she said. Alara understood that. She wanted to see their faces too. The house itself became a fortress disguised as a target. Rowan positioned extra rifles near every window, loaded and ready. He showed Alara 3 different ways out if things went wrong. Through the cellar, through the back bedroom window, through the roof hatch in the attic that most people didn't know existed. "If shooting starts, you get out," he said. "You don't try to be a hero." "Same goes for you. I'm not planning on dying today." "Good, because I'd be annoyed if you got yourself killed before I figured out whether I actually like you." He looked startled, then almost laughed. "Fair enough?" The waiting was the worst part. They maintained the charade for 3 days, long enough to seem believable, not so long that Brennan would suspect a trap. Alara cooked meals. Miguel did visible work around the property. Rowan rode to town twice, making sure people saw him looking worried and worn down. On the 3rd night, as the sun set red and angry over the mountains, Rowan gathered everyone in the kitchen for final instructions. "They'll come after midnight if they're smart," he said. "That's when most people sleep deepest. Miguel, you're in the barn ruins with Jack. They'll approach from the east if they're planning another fire. Dorothy, Carlson, you're on the north ridge with clear sightlines to the house. And Tom, you watch the south approach. Everyone stays hidden until we have enough to nail them." "Define enough," Carlson said. "Verbal threats we can testify to. Physical evidence of arson or destruction, something that makes it impossible for the sheriff to ignore." Rowan's jaw tightened. "But nobody shoots unless they shoot first. We're not murderers, and I won't have innocent people's blood on my hands." "What if they come at the house?" Anne asked. "Then they deal with me and Alara. We'll be ready." After everyone dispersed to their positions, the house fell quiet. Rowan checked the rifles one more time while Alara made coffee, strong enough to keep them awake through the long night ahead. "You scared?" he asked. "Terrified." She handed him a cup. "You?" "Yeah." He took a drink, staring out the dark window. "Mostly scared of what happens if this doesn't work. We're putting everyone at risk on the chance we can catch Brennan's men in the act. If we're wrong, if they don't come, or if they come but we can't prove it's Brennan behind them, we've shown our hand for nothing. And if we're right, then we've got a chance. Maybe." He set his cup down. "Sarah used to say I had a talent for finding the hardest possible way to solve any problem." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife voluntarily. Alara chose her words carefully. "What else did she say?" "That I was stubborn as hell and twice as mean when I was cornered." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She wasn't wrong. We fought constantly the first year we were married. She wanted to move back east where her family was, somewhere safer. I wanted to build something here. She thought I was crazy for taking on Brennan, even back then." "Why did you take him on?" "Because he assumed I'd roll over. Because men like him think they can take whatever they want just because they have money and guns." He looked at Alara. "Same reason you're not running from Vance anymore. Sometimes you get tired of letting other people write your story." Alara understood that better than he knew. "Would Sarah have liked me?" Rowan considered that. Probably not at first. She was protective, territorial about this place. But she'd respect you for standing when you could run. That would count for something. "I hope so." Alara moved to the window, scanning the darkness. "You still love her." "Every day." His voice was quiet. "But she's gone. And I'm still here." Took me a long time to figure out those two things could both be true. Before Alara could respond, she caught movement in the distance. "Rowan!" He was beside her instantly, following her gaze. 4 riders moving slowly from the east, their horses dark shapes against the starlit sky. They doused any lights, smart, and they were approaching from the direction of the barn ruins where Miguel and Jack were hidden. "That's them," Rowan breathed. He moved to the back window, gave a low whistle. 2 short, 1 long, the signal they'd agreed on. In the hills, their allies would be getting into position. The riders stopped about 100 yards from the house. Alara could see them conferring, pointing, making decisions. Then 3 of them dismounted while the 4th stayed with the horses. The 3 on foot split up, 2 headed for the house, 1 toward what was left of the barn. "They're going to try to finish the job," Alara whispered. "Let them get close. We need them to do something we can prove." Rowan moved to the side window, rifle ready. "Stay low. Don't show yourself until I say." Alara crouched below the window line, her own rifle heavy in her hands. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. The 2 men approaching the house were carrying something. Lanterns, she realized. Lanterns and what looked like oil cans. They were going to burn it down. The men reached the porch. Through the window, Alara could hear them talking in low voices. Brennan said, "Make it look like an accident." How's a house fire an accident when the barn already burned? Lightning strike, kicked over lantern. Who cares? Just get it done. One of them was splashing oil on the porch boards. The smell hit Alara's nose, sharp, chemical. She looked at Rowan, saw his face had gone cold and hard. "That's enough," he said quietly. Then louder. "Step away from the house, both of you." The men froze. The one with the oil can dropped it, his hand going for his gun. Rowan fired a shot into the porch boards between them. A warning, not a killing shot. Next one's not a miss, Rowan said. Drop your weapons and get on your knees. For a second, Alara thought they might comply. Then all hell broke loose. The man without the oil can drew and fired at the window. The glass exploded inward. Alara hit the floor, felt shards rain down on her back. Rowan returned fire, and one of the men went down screaming, clutching his leg. Outside, more shots erupted. The third man at the barn ruins had engaged with Miguel and Jack. The one holding the horses was trying to control panicking animals and shoot at the same time. "Stay down!" Rowan shouted at Alara, then moved to the door. "The hell with that!" Alara was up, moving to the other window, rifle raised. The man still standing on the porch was trying to drag his wounded friend away while firing blindly at the house. She aimed carefully, the way Miguel had taught her, and fired at the ground near his feet. He stumbled, lost his grip on his friend, and suddenly Miguel was there from the barn ruins, rifle pointed at the man's head. "Don't even think about it," Miguel said. The man dropped his gun. In the chaos, the one holding the horses panicked. He fired 2 more shots, wild, desperate, then mounted and rode hard toward the south approach, where Anne and Tom were waiting. Alara heard Anne's voice ring out clear in the night. "Stop or I drop your horse." The rider didn't stop. Anne's rifle cracked once, and the horse went down. The man tumbled, rolled, came up running. Tom tackled him from the side, and they went down in a tangle of fists and curses. By the time it was over, really over, they had 3 of Brennan's men captured and 1 escaped. The man Rowan had shot was bleeding bad but would live. The others were bruised and furious but intact. Dorothy and Carlson came down from the ridge, weapons still raised. More neighbors emerged from hiding spots. They formed a circle around the captured men while Rowan lit a lantern. "Names," Rowan demanded. The men stayed silent. "We've got all night, and come morning, you're going to the territorial marshal in Helena, whether you talk or not. Question is whether you go as witnesses or conspirators." Rowan crouched down to eye level with the wounded man. "Marcus Brennan sent you here tonight. We all know it, but we need you to say it." "I'm not saying nothing." The man's face was pale with pain. "You got no proof." "We've got you on my property with oil cans and guns," Rowan said. "We've got a dozen witnesses who saw you try to burn my house down. We've got your verbal confirmation that someone told you to make it look like an accident." He straightened up. "But if you want to protect Brennan and hang alone, that's your choice." Miguel pulled something from the wounded man's pocket, a folded paper. He opened it, held it up to the light, and his expression went flat. "It's a letter. From Brennan. Offering payment for services rendered." The man's face went slack. "That's not, you can't." "It's got his signature," Miguel continued, "and specific instructions about which properties to target and when." He looked at Rowan. "This is what we needed." Rowan took the letter, read it by lamplight. Alara watched his face change as he processed what he was seeing. This wasn't just proof of tonight's attack. This was documentation of a pattern. Multiple properties, multiple dates, all in Brennan's handwriting. "Why would you carry this?" Dorothy asked the wounded man. "Why not destroy it?" "He told us to bring it back for payment," the man muttered. "Said he'd only pay if we could prove what we'd done." "Well," Rowan said softly, "that was stupid." The man lunged at him, despite the leg wound. Miguel and Jack had to drag him back down. He was screaming obscenities, threatening what Brennan would do when he found out, promising that they'd all be dead within a week. "Gag him," Dorothy said tiredly. "I'm getting too old for this drama." They tied the men up in what was left of the barn, posted guards, and gathered in the house to figure out their next move. Dawn was maybe 2 hours away. Everyone was exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. "We need to move fast," Carlson said. "Once Brennan realizes his men didn't come back, he'll know something went wrong." "We take them to Helena today," Rowan decided. "Dorothy, you still have those contacts in the territorial government?" "I do. And I know a marshal who's honest, at least honest enough to look at evidence even if it implicates powerful men." "Then that's our play. We get these men and this letter to Helena, we make formal charges, and we force someone to investigate." Rowan looked around the room. "It's not a perfect solution. Brennan's got lawyers and money and influence, but it's a start." "What about protection?" Anne asked. "Once we accuse him openly, he'll retaliate." "We stick together. Same as we've been doing. Nobody goes anywhere alone. Nobody drops their guard. Rowan's voice was hard. And if he comes at us again, we defend ourselves. We've got the right. Tom spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. We really doing this? Going up against Marcus Brennan in court? We're doing this, Alara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. We've come too far to back down now. Everyone looked at her. She met their gazes steadily. This woman who'd shown up 6 weeks ago with nothing and had somehow become part of this fight. She's right, Miguel said. We fight or we lose everything. Those are the choices. One by one, they all agreed. They set out for Helena at first light. Rowan, Dorothy, Miguel, and 2 of the captured men who'd agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. The third man, still too injured to travel, stayed under guard at Dorothy's place. Alara wanted to go, but Rowan insisted she stay to watch the ranch with Jack and Tom. If Brennan figures out what we're doing, he might hit the property while we're gone, Rowan said. I need someone here I trust. You trust me to defend your land? I trust you to do what needs doing. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, then just touched her shoulder briefly. We'll be back in 3 days, 4 at most. Be careful. Always am. That's a lie, but I appreciate the effort. He almost smiled, then mounted his horse and rode out with the others, leaving Alara standing in front of the burned-out barn, watching them disappear into the morning light. The next 3 days were the longest of Alara's life. She kept the house locked, slept in shifts with Jack and Tom, jumped at every sound. Neighbors checked in regularly, but the absence of Rowan and Miguel left a hole that couldn't be filled with good intentions. On the second day, a package arrived via freight wagon. The driver handed it to Alara with a shrug. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a letter from the law firm in Helena. Her hands shook as she opened it. Richard Vance was dead. The letter included a death certificate, a newspaper clipping about his murder, and a formal request for her testimony. The firm represented not his widow, but the state's attorney, who was building a case against a man named Thomas Kearney, Vance's former business partner's son, who'd apparently spent 8 years tracking down his father's killer. Alara read the letter 3 times, trying to process it. Vance was actually dead. The man who'd haunted her nightmares for 8 years had been shot in the same office where he'd killed his partner by the same son who'd sworn vengeance. And now they needed her to testify to give the case legitimacy. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread out before her, and tried to figure out what she felt. Relief? Fear? Some complicated mixture of both? You all right? Jack asked from the doorway. I don't know. She folded the letter. The man I've been running from is dead. They want me to testify against the man who killed him. Are you going to? I don't know that either. She looked at Jack, this kid who'd learned to shoot and fight alongside her. If I leave to go testify, I might never come back. The trial could take months, and by the time it's over, everything here might be resolved or destroyed. Rowan would want you to go, if it means you're finally free. But what if I don't want to be free? The words came out raw, unplanned. What if I want to stay and fight for this place? For these people? Jack didn't have an answer to that. Neither did Alara. That night, she dreamed of Ohio, of the factory, the window, the gunshot. But in the dream, when Vance looked up and saw her watching, he smiled and said, "You can run, but you'll never stop running." She woke in a cold sweat, reaching for the rifle beside her bed. Rowan came back on the 4th day, looking exhausted but satisfied. They'd filed charges. The territorial marshal had reviewed the evidence and agreed to investigate. Warrants were being prepared for Brennan and 6 of his men. It's not over, Rowan warned as they gathered in the kitchen. He'll fight this with everything he has, but at least now it's official. He can't just burn us out and walk away. What happens next? Alara asked. We wait. Marshall's coming out here in 2 weeks to take statements from everyone who witnessed the attacks. Until then, we keep our heads down and watch for retaliation. He's going to come after us. Probably, but we've got leverage now. If anything happens to any of us before the investigation's complete, it just strengthens the case against him. Rowan poured himself coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long. Still not safe, but it's something. Alara showed him the letter from Helena. He read it in silence, his expression unreadable. "So Vance is dead," he said finally. "Yes." "And they want you to testify." "Yes." "Are you going to?" It was the question she'd been asking herself for 3 days. "I don't know. If I leave now, I might miss everything here. The investigation, the trial against Brennan, everything we've been fighting for. But if you don't go, you'll never really be free of it. There'll always be that unfinished piece." Rowan set the letter down. "Alara, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. You don't owe me anything. This marriage was a business arrangement, and you've held up your end. If you need to go to Ohio, if you need to testify and put that chapter behind you, I won't hold you to anything. Stop offering to let me go. I'm not. You are. Every time things get hard, you tell me I can leave, like you're expecting me to." She stood up, frustrated. "What if I don't want to leave? What if I want to stay here and see this through?" "Then stay." His voice was quiet. "But don't stay because you think you owe me. Don't stay because you're afraid to face Ohio. Stay because you actually want to be here." "Do you want me to stay?" The question hung between them. Rowan looked at her for a long moment, and Alara saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty, maybe, or something deeper he wasn't ready to name. "Yes," he said finally. "I want you to stay. But not like this. Not as some business arrangement we're both pretending is enough." He took a breath. "When you first got here, I needed a wife on paper, someone to help me hold this land. But somewhere along the way that changed, and I don't know what to do with that." Alara's heart was hammering. "Changed how?" "I don't know. I'm still figuring it out." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "All I know is when I left for Helena, I spent the whole ride worrying something would happen to you. And when I got back and you were safe, He stopped. This wasn't supposed to be complicated. "Nothing's ever simple." "No, it's not." He met her eyes. "So what do we do?" Alara thought about the letter, about Ohio, about the testimony that could finally close that chapter of her life. She thought about this ranch, these people, this man who'd given her shelter when she had nothing and who was now looking at her like she mattered beyond the arrangement they'd made. "I think," she said slowly, "I should go to Ohio, testify, finish that part of my story so it's not hanging over me anymore." She saw his face fall and hurried on. "But I'm coming back. Not because I owe you, not because I'm afraid, but because this is where I want to be." "You can't promise that. You don't know what'll happen once you're back there." "No, but I know what I want." She moved closer. "I want to see Brennan prosecuted. I want to help these families keep their land. I want to figure out what this thing between us is actually becoming." She managed a shaky smile. "And I really want to rebuild that barn because the horses miss having proper shelter." Rowan laughed, startled and genuine. "You're serious. Dead serious. I'll go to Ohio, I'll testify, and I'll come back. If you'll have me." He shook his head. "Alara, you're the most stubborn, reckless, brave person I've ever met. Of course I'll have you back." "Good, because I already wrote to the law firm saying I'd come. The trial's in 6 weeks." 6 weeks. He processed that. "That's cutting it close. Marshall's investigation will still be ongoing. Then you'll have to handle it without me for a while. Think you can manage?" "Managed alone for 6 years. I'll make it work." He hesitated. "But I'll miss you, just so you know." It was the most vulnerable thing he'd said to her. Alara felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and terrifying. "I'll miss you too," she said. They stood there in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, and for the first time since that desperate wedding 6 weeks ago, the space between them felt like it could become something real. Whatever happened next, with Brennan, with the trial in Ohio, with the uncertain future they were building, they'd face it as partners, not just on paper, but in truth, and that was worth fighting for. Alara left for Ohio on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the Montana sky was the color of steel, and the first frost had already killed the last of the garden vegetables. Rowan drove her to the stage station in Covenant Ridge, neither of them saying much during the ride. What was there to say that hadn't already been said in the 2 weeks since they'd made their decision? At the station, he helped her down from the wagon and handed her the small trunk that held everything she'd need for the journey: the blue calico dress, a few other clothes Dorothy had altered for her, the letter from the law firm, and tucked at the bottom, a folded piece of paper with Rowan's handwriting. She'd found it on her pillow the night before, addressed simply to Elara. She hadn't opened it yet. 6 weeks, Rowan said. Maybe 8 if the trial drags. I'll write when I can. Don't make promises you can't keep. Focus on the testimony, on closing that chapter. He pulled an envelope from his coat. There's money in here. Enough for the fare back and then some. Don't argue, just take it. She took it. Thank you. And Elara? He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. Be careful. Vance might be dead, but that doesn't mean everyone connected to him is. I will. The stage driver called for passengers to board. Elara picked up her trunk, then set it down again and turned back to Rowan. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped close and kissed his cheek, brief and awkward. Don't let Brennan burn anything else while I'm gone, she said. His hand came up to where she'd kissed him, surprise clear on his face. No promises. She climbed into the stage, found a seat by the window, and watched as Covenant Ridge disappeared behind her. Only then did she open Rowan's letter. The handwriting was rough, unpracticed, like a man more comfortable with a rifle than a pen. Elara, I'm not good with words, so I'll keep this short. When you first showed up, half-starved and desperate, I thought I was doing you a favor. Turns out you were doing me one. You gave me a reason to fight that wasn't just anger and grief. You reminded me what it feels like to build something instead of just holding on to ruins. Come back if you want to. But if Ohio gives you a better life than this harsh land can offer, I won't blame you for staying there. You've earned the right to choose your own path. Either way, thank you. For saying yes that first day. For staying when you could have run. For making me remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond revenge. Elara folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside her dress, close to her heart. Then she watched the Montana landscape roll by and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The journey east took 11 days. Stage to the rail line, train through territories that grew progressively greener and more crowded, nights in stations and cheap hotels where she slept with one hand on the knife she'd started carrying. By the time she reached Ohio, autumn was in full swing, the trees ablaze with color that seemed almost offensive after the stark beauty of Montana. The law firm was in Columbus, housed in a brick building that smelled of paper and furniture polish. The lawyer who greeted her was a thin man named Patterson, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. Miss Quinn, or should I say Mrs. Cade? Either one works. We're grateful you agreed to testify. Your account of what you witnessed 8 years ago is crucial to the case against Thomas Kearney. He gestured to a chair. I know this won't be easy. Revisiting trauma never is. When's the trial? 3 weeks. The defense has been trying to delay, but the judge is holding firm. Patterson opened a file on his desk. Before we proceed, I need to verify some details. You were working as a bookkeeper at Vance Manufacturing in 1877? Yes. And on the night of March 14th, you witnessed Richard Vance shoot and kill his business partner, Edmund Kearney. The memory rose up sharp and clear. The window, the gunshot, the way Vance had looked up and seen her watching. Yes. Can you describe what you saw? She described it. The argument she'd overheard through the office door, the raised voices, the gunshot that had made her run to the window. Edmund Kearney on the floor, blood spreading beneath him. Richard Vance standing over him with the gun. Patterson listened, taking notes. When she finished, he set down his pen. That matches the account Thomas Kearney gave when he confessed to killing Vance. He said his father's death was ruled an accident at the time, but he never believed it. He spent years tracking down evidence, and when he finally confronted Vance, Vance confirmed everything, bragged about it even. That's when Thomas shot him. So Thomas Kearney killed the man who murdered his father. Yes, but it was still murder. Vigilante justice, no matter how justified the motive. Patterson leaned back. The prosecution wants to charge him with first-degree murder. But if we can prove that Vance was a murderer himself, that Thomas was seeking justice for a crime the system failed to address, we might be able to argue for a lesser charge. Manslaughter, possibly. With your testimony, we can establish that pattern. And if I don't testify, then Thomas Kearney likely hangs for killing a man the law considers innocent. Patterson met her eyes. I know you've spent 8 years running from this. I know testifying means reliving it, but you're the only person who can tell the truth about what Richard Vance was. Alara thought about the last 8 years. The running, the fear, the constant weight of a secret she'd carried alone. She thought about Thomas Kearney, a son who'd loved his father enough to spend 8 years hunting his killer. I'll testify, she said, but I need one thing in return. What's that? When this is over, I need assurance that my name won't be in any newspapers, that my testimony will be part of the court record but not public knowledge. She kept her voice steady. I have a life now, in Montana. People who depend on me. I can't have this following me back there. Patterson considered that. I can't guarantee the press won't report on the trial, but I can keep your name out of the formal documents that go to newspapers. List you as witness EQ in any public filings. Will that work? It'll have to. The next 3 weeks were a strange suspension between worlds. Alara stayed in a boarding house near the courthouse, spending her days preparing for testimony and her nights lying awake thinking about Montana, about Rowan, about whether the ranch was still standing, whether Brennan had made good on his threats, whether she'd made a terrible mistake leaving when the fight was still ongoing. She wrote letters but didn't send them. What was there to say that wouldn't sound desperate or afraid? On the eve of the trial, she finally broke down and sent one anyway. Rowan, I'm testifying tomorrow. The lawyer says it'll take most of the day, maybe longer if the defense fights hard. After that, I should be free to leave within a week. Ohio is strange, green and crowded, and nothing like home. Because that's what Montana is now, isn't it? Home. I didn't realize it until I left. I hope you're safe. I hope Brennan's investigation is moving forward. I hope the ranch is still standing and Tom hasn't burned down the kitchen trying to cook. I'll be back soon. I promise. She mailed it knowing it wouldn't reach him before she had to testify, but it felt important to send it anyway, like putting something solid into the world instead of just carrying it around in her head. The trial began on a cold morning in late October. The courtroom was packed. Apparently, the case of a son killing his father's murderer was sensational enough to draw crowds. Alara sat in a side room with Patterson, waiting to be called, trying to keep her hands from shaking. You'll do fine, Patterson assured her. Just tell the truth. That's all we need. When they called her to the stand, she walked through the courtroom feeling every eye on her. Thomas Kearney sat at the defense table, young, maybe 26, with his father's dark hair and haunted eyes that followed her as she passed. He looked like a man who'd already made peace with whatever came next. The oath, the questions, the slow reconstruction of that night 8 years ago. Alara spoke clearly, didn't embellish, didn't hide. She told them what she'd seen, what she'd heard, why she'd run. And you're certain it was Richard Vance who fired the weapon? The prosecutor asked. Completely certain. No possibility of mistake? None. The defense attorney was harder. He tried to suggest her memory was faulty, that 8 years had colored her recollection, that she had reason to lie now that Vance couldn't defend himself. But Alara had spent 8 years running from the truth. She wasn't going to run from it now. I know what I saw, she said steadily. Richard Vance murdered Edmund Kearney in cold blood. I watched him do it. And then I spent 8 years afraid he'd kill me too if I ever told anyone. Yet you never came forward, never went to the police. Because I was terrified. Because I was alone and powerless. And I knew Vance had money and influence. She looked at Thomas Kearney. But his son wasn't powerless. And he did what the law should have done 8 years ago. Objection, the prosecutor called. The witness is not here to justify vigilante murder. Sustained. Mrs. Cade, please limit your responses to what you witnessed. But the damage, or the truth, was already out there. The trial lasted 6 days. Other witnesses testified. People who'd worked for Vance, people who'd suspected him of the murder but never had proof. Character witnesses who painted him as ruthless and violent. By the time it went to the jury, the narrative had shifted. This wasn't just about Thomas Kearney killing a man. It was about a broken system that had let a murderer walk free. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, they convicted Thomas Kearney of manslaughter, not murder. He'd served 10 years with possibility of parole after 5. It wasn't justice. Not really, but it was something. Afterwards, Thomas Kearney's lawyer approached Alara outside the courthouse. He wanted me to thank you for telling the truth, for making sure people knew what his father really was. He didn't have to kill Vance. No, but he did anyway, and now he'll pay for it. The lawyer handed her an envelope. He also wanted you to have this. He said you'd understand. Inside was a photograph. Edmund Kearney with his son, both of them smiling, taken years before everything fell apart. On the back, Thomas had written, "Thank you for remembering him as he was, not just how he died." Alara folded the photograph carefully and added it to the small collection of things she was bringing back to Montana. Proof that the past couldn't be erased, but it could be laid to rest. She sent a telegram to Rowan that night. Trial over. Coming home. Arriving November 12th, if stages run on time. His response came 2 days later. Good. We need you. Brennan's trial starts November 20th. That was all. But it was enough. The journey back west felt longer than the journey out, maybe because she knew what she was returning to now. Not just a business arrangement or a desperate bargain, but something real and complicated and worth fighting for. She arrived in Covenant Ridge on a gray afternoon, the mountains already dusted with snow. The stage let her off at the station, and she stood there with her trunk, looking around for Rowan. He wasn't there. Her heart sank. Then she heard Tom's voice. "Mrs. Cade!" He was running toward her, grinning, and behind him came Jack and Miguel and Dorothy Hayes and half a dozen other people from neighboring ranches. They surrounded her like she was someone who'd been missed. "Where's Rowan?" she asked. "At the ranch," Miguel said. "Marshall's there taking depositions for the trial. He couldn't leave." "But he sent us to fetch you," Tom added. "And to make sure you knew, we rebuilt the barn while you were gone. Well, most of it." You rebuilt the barn?" "Rowan said you'd want it done before winter." Jack grabbed her trunk. "Come on, let's get you home." Home. There was that word again. They rode out in a wagon Dorothy had brought, and as they approached the rolling sea, Alara saw it. The new barn, raw lumber still pale against the weathered buildings around it, but solid and real. Smoke rose from the house chimney. Horses grazed in the pasture. It looked like a place where people lived and worked and fought for something that mattered. Rowan was on the porch when they pulled up. He looked thinner, more worn, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. He came down the steps as she climbed out of the wagon. "You came back," he said. "I told you I would." "I know, but I wasn't sure I believed it." They stood there for a moment, aware of everyone watching, uncertain how to bridge the gap that 6 weeks had created. Then Alara closed the distance and hugged him, brief and fierce. "I'm home," she said against his shoulder. "Don't make me leave again." His arms came around her tight. Not planning on it. Behind them, someone, probably Tom, let out a whoop. Alara pulled back, embarrassed, but Rowan was smiling. "Come inside," he said. "We've got a lot to catch up on." The house was cleaner than she'd left it, which meant the men had actually been maintaining it. There was fresh coffee on the stove and bread that looked like Dorothy's handiwork. The territorial marshal was a solid man in his 50s with gray in his beard and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. "Mrs. Cade," he said, extending his hand. "Marshal Hendricks, your husband's been telling me about your role in catching Brennan's men. I did what needed doing. So I hear. I'll need to take your statement as well, but it can wait until tomorrow. You must be exhausted from the journey." He gathered his papers. "Mr. Cade, I'll be back in the morning. We'll go over the timeline one more time before the trial." After he left, and after the neighbors had gone home, it was just Alara and Rowan in the kitchen. The same kitchen where this had all started, where they'd made their desperate bargain 2 months ago. "Tell me everything," Alara said. Rowan told her. About the marshal's investigation, which had uncovered evidence linking Brennan to at least 7 different attacks on ranchers who'd refused to sell. About the 2 of Brennan's men who'd agreed to testify in exchange for reduced charges. about how Brennan had tried to flee to California but had been arrested at the border. "The trial's in 10 days, Rowan said. "Prosecution thinks it's a strong case, but Brennan's got expensive lawyers. It could go either way. And if he wins, then we keep fighting. We don't stop until he's buried, or we are." He looked at her. "But let's not think about that tonight. Tonight, I just want to know, how is Ohio?" She told him about the trial, about Thomas Kearney, about standing up in court and finally speaking the truth she'd carried for 8 years. About how it felt to walk out of that courthouse knowing Vance was truly dead and she was truly free. "So it's over," Rowan said. "That chapter of your life." "Yes." She pulled out the photograph Thomas had given her. "But I wanted you to see this, to understand what we were fighting for there. The same thing we're fighting for here. Justice for people who deserved better than what they got." Rowan studied the photograph, the father and son before tragedy tore them apart. "You think Thomas Kearney was justified, killing Vance?" "I think he did what he thought was right, just like we're doing what we think is right." She took the photograph back. "The difference is we're trying to do it within the law. That has to count for something." "Maybe. We'll find out soon enough." That night, Alara lay in her narrow bed and listened to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling around her, the wind against the windows, the horses moving in their stalls in the new barn, the creek running somewhere in the distance. She was home, really home. And whatever came next, with Brennan's trial, with the ranch, with Rowan, she was ready to face it. The trial of Marcus Brennan began on November 20th in the Territorial Courthouse, 30 miles from Covenant Ridge. The courtroom was even more crowded than the one in Ohio had been. This was a big case, a powerful man brought low by a group of ranchers who'd refused to be intimidated. Alara sat with Dorothy and the other ranchers who'd been targeted. Ann Pritchard was there, her husband James still healing but able to testify. Miguel and Jack and Tom sat behind Rowan, a show of solidarity. Brennan looked diminished somehow, sitting at the defense table in his expensive suit. Without his hired guns and his threats, he was just a man who'd overreached. The prosecution built their case methodically. The letter Miguel had found, with Brennan's handwriting and specific instructions. The testimony of the men who'd been caught trying to burn Rowan's house. The pattern of attacks documented by a dozen witnesses. The circumstantial evidence about Sarah Cade's death, which couldn't be proven but hung over everything like smoke. Rowan testified for 2 hours, laying out 5 years of harassment and intimidation. He was calm, factual, devastating. When the defense attorney tried to suggest he'd provoked the attacks by being unreasonable about selling, Rowan said simply, "A man has a right to keep what's his." Brennan decided that right didn't apply if you stood in his way. Alara testified about the night they'd caught Brennan's men, about the oil cans and the threats, and the letter that proved coordination. The defense tried to shake her testimony, but she'd had practice in Ohio. She knew how to tell the truth and make it stick. The trial lasted 8 days. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, witness intimidation. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in territorial prison. When the verdict came down, Alara watched Brennan's face collapse. He'd probably expected his money and connections to save him, but for once, justice had teeth. Outside the courthouse, the ranchers who'd stood together erupted in celebration. Dorothy was crying, Ann was hugging everyone she could reach. Tom was talking excitedly about rebuilding his family's burned barn. Rowan stood apart from the crowd, staring back at the courthouse. Alara went to him. "It's over," she said. "Is it? He'll appeal. His lawyers will fight it." "Let them fight. We won. That's what matters." He turned to look at her. "Sarah and Emma didn't get justice. He was never charged with their deaths." "No, but he'll spend the rest of his life in prison." "That's something." She touched his arm. "You can let go now. You can stop fighting." "I don't know how to stop." "Then learn. We both will." She smiled. "We've got time now. Actual time to build instead of just defend. To figure out what this place becomes when we're not constantly under siege." Something shifted in his expression, grief giving way to something that might have been hope. "You really mean to stay. I really do. Even though it's going to be hard, Winter's coming, money's tight, and He stopped. I'm not easy to live with, I know that. Neither am I. We'll figure it out together. She looked back at the courthouse, at the people celebrating on the steps. We're not just business partners anymore, Rowan. You know that, right? I know. He took her hand, tentative. I don't know what we are exactly, but I know I don't want you to leave again. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. They stood there, hand in hand, while around them people celebrated victory. It wasn't a perfect ending. Rowan was still grieving his first family. Alara was still learning how to stop running. The ranch was still struggling financially, and winter was going to be brutal. But they had each other, and they had time. And sometimes that was enough. Winter came hard and early that year. By December, the snow was 3 feet deep, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze in the pipes. Alara learned how to break ice in the morning, how to keep the fire going all night, how to make supplies stretch when the roads were impassable. She also learned how to work alongside Rowan in the kind of silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. They developed rhythms, him handling the heavy outdoor work, her managing the house, and helping with the animals. Tom and Jack and Miguel became fixtures, eating meals at the house, working the land like it was their own. On a night in January, when the wind howled so loud it sounded like the world was ending, Alara and Rowan sat by the fire with coffee and the companionable quiet of people who didn't need to fill every silence. I've been thinking, Rowan said finally. About? About what comes next. We've got the land secured, Brennan's locked up, your testimony in Ohio is done. We've got breathing room for the first time since I can remember. And I think we should make this real. The marriage, I mean. He set down his cup. Right now, it's still just a legal arrangement, a business deal, but that's not what I want anymore. Alara's heart started hammering. What do you want? I want a partner, a real one. Someone to build this place with, to face whatever comes next with. He looked at her directly. I want you, not as hired help or a convenience, but as my actual wife. If you'll have me. That sounds like a proposal. It is. He pulled something from his pocket, a ring, different from Sarah's gold band. This one was silver with a small blue stone. I had this made in town. Thought you should have something that's yours, not a hand-me-down from a dead woman. Alara took the ring, felt the weight of it, the intentionality. This wasn't a desperate bargain made under pressure. This was a choice, freely given. Yes, she said. I'll have you, for real this time. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, tentative at first, then deeper when she kissed him back. It wasn't the kiss of strangers playing roles. It was the kiss of two people who'd earned each other through fire and hardship and choice. When they pulled apart, Rowan was smiling, actually smiling, something Alara had seen so rarely it felt like a gift. So what now? She asked. Now we build. We plant in spring, we expand the herd, we make this place into something Sarah would be proud of and Emma would have loved to grow up in. His voice caught slightly on his daughter's name, but he pushed through. We make it ours, both of us. Sounds like a plan. They sat by the fire, Alara's head on Rowan's shoulder, and watched the flames dance. Outside, the wind still howled, but inside it was warm and safe and theirs. Spring came slowly, like it wasn't sure it was welcome yet. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass that would eventually green up. The creek swelled with runoff. The horses got restless, eager to run after months of being confined. On a morning in late March, exactly 1 year after Alara had first arrived in Covenant Ridge, she stood on the porch and looked out at the land that was now truly hers. The rebuilt barn stood solid. The fences had been mended. The garden plot was ready for planting. Rowan came up beside her, coffee in hand. Thinking about something? About a year ago, when I showed up here with nothing. You had 11 cents, you told me. And now I have this. She gestured at the ranch. A home, a husband, people who depend on me. It's strange how fast things can change. You made them change. You chose to stay when you could have run. He handed her the coffee. I've been thinking about expansion. Maybe buy the Pritchard place if James and Anne decide to sell. They've been talking about moving back east where Anne's family is. Can we afford it? Not yet. But maybe in a year or two if we're smart. He looked at her. What do you think? The fact that he was asking, that he considered it a joint decision, still felt new and strange and right. I think we should talk to them, see what they're asking. Plan for it even if we can't do it yet. She smiled. We're good at planning for the impossible. Yeah, we are. That summer they worked harder than Alara had ever worked in her life. They planted crops, tended cattle, built additional corrals. Tom got married to a girl from town and brought her to work at the ranch. Jack left to try his hand at prospecting, but Miguel stayed, becoming as much a part of the place as the land itself. Dorothy visited regularly, bringing news from town and gossip about Brennan's failed appeals. Anne and James did decide to sell, and Rowan started putting money aside for when they could make an offer. On their first real anniversary, the one they counted from Rowan's proposal by the fire, not the desperate wedding in the church, they had dinner in town at the only restaurant Covenant Ridge could claim. It was loud and crowded and the food was mediocre, but they laughed more than Alara could remember laughing in years. You know what's funny? Rowan said over dessert that was more grease than pie. What? I spent 6 years angry, grieving, convinced the only thing I had left was this land and revenge. And then you showed up and reminded me there were other things worth living for. Like mediocre pie? Like possibility? Like building instead of just defending? Like having a future that's not just about holding on to the past? Alara reached across the table and took his hand. Sarah and Emma, we're lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have you. Those things can both be true. I'm starting to believe that. They walked home under stars that seemed close enough to touch, and when they got back to the ranch, Rowan pulled her close on the porch and they danced to no music, just the sound of the wind and the creek and the life they'd built together. 2 years after Alara first arrived in Covenant Ridge, they bought the Pritchard land. It nearly bankrupted them, but it doubled their water access and their grazing area. They hired more hands, built more structures, slowly turned the rolling sea into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Tom and his wife had their first child, a boy they named Edmund after Tom's grandfather. Alara delivered him while Rowan paced outside, nervous, and invested in a way that showed how much this makeshift family meant to him. Miguel fell in love with Dorothy's niece and married her in a ceremony that drew half the territory. Jack came back from his prospecting failure and sheepishly asked for his job back. Rowan hired him without hesitation. The land that had once been contested, fought over, nearly burned to the ground, became something stable, something worth the fight. On a morning in early autumn, 5 years after that first desperate bargain, Alara stood in the same spot where she'd stood that first morning, in the kitchen, making coffee, watching the sun rise over land that was finally, truly secure. Rowan came in from the barn, stopped when he saw her, and smiled. It was the real smile now, the one she'd earned by staying. "Morning," he said. "Morning." But she handed him coffee. "I've been thinking about that first day, when you offered me that ultimatum, marry you or walk away with nothing. That was a hell of a thing to ask someone." "It was, but I said yes anyway." She set down her cup. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd walked away?" "Every day." He moved closer. "I'd probably be dead or burned out. Brennan would have won. This place would be part of his empire. But instead I stayed, and we fought, and we won. We did. And I love you." The words came out natural, easy, true. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Somewhere between fighting for this land and rebuilding that barn and learning how to stop running. But I do. Love you." Rowan set down his own cup and pulled her into his arms. "I love you too. Have for a while now. Just wasn't sure I had the right to say it. You have the right. We both do." She looked up at him. "We've earned it." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while outside the ranch woke up around them. Horses whinnied, cattle lowed. Miguel's voice called out to one of the hands about something that needed fixing. It was messy and imperfect, and exactly what they'd both needed. 7 years after Alara Quinn stepped off that stage in Covenant Ridge with holes in her boots and 11 cents in her pocket, she stood on the same porch with Rowan Cade and looked out at land that bore both their names. They'd added onto the house, 2 more bedrooms for the family they were hoping to build, A proper study where Rowan kept the ranch records, a pantry large enough to store food for a hard winter. The barn had been expanded twice. The cattle herd had grown to nearly 500 head. They'd even bought a second property to the south, making the Rolling Sea one of the largest ranches in Montana Territory. Tom's family had grown to 3 children. Miguel and his wife were expecting their first. Jack had married Dorothy's other niece and was managing the southern property. The community they'd fought so hard to protect had grown stronger, more connected. Marcus Brennan had died in prison 2 years back. Alara had felt nothing when she heard the news, not satisfaction, not grief, just the quiet closing of a chapter. Rowan had been silent for a day, processing, then had told her he was ready to let go of the anger. It had taken him 8 years, but he'd finally made peace with Sarah and Emma's deaths. Not forgotten them, never that, but found a way to honor their memory by building something good. And Alara had finally stopped looking over her shoulder. The news from Ohio was that Thomas Kearney had been paroled after serving 6 years, had moved west himself, and was working as a carpenter somewhere in Colorado. She'd sent him a letter once, telling him she hoped he'd found some measure of peace. He'd never responded, but she hadn't expected him to. Now, standing on the porch with Rowan's arm around her shoulders, Alara thought about that first desperate choice: marry a stranger or walk away with nothing. It had seemed impossible at the time, a bargain made under duress, a leap into the unknown with no guarantee of landing safely. But desperation had led to determination. Determination had led to partnership. And partnership had led to something neither of them had expected: a real marriage, a real life, built from the ruins of their separate pasts. "You thinking about something?" Rowan asked. "About how far we've come." "Long way from that first day. You threatened me with an ultimatum. You showed up half dead from hunger, didn't have much choice. We both made choices. Every day since then we've been making choices." She turned to face him. "And I'd make the same ones again, even knowing how hard it would be. Especially knowing that the hard parts made it real." She touched his face, feeling the scar above his eyebrow from that fight with Brennan's men, the weathered skin from years in the sun, the life they'd built together written in every line. "We earned this, all of it. We did." He kissed her forehead. "And we're not done yet. Still got a lot of living to do." "Good, because I'm not finished with you, Rowan Cade." "Feelings mutual, Alara Cade." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, painting the land in gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. The wind carried the smell of sage and grass and the promise of another Montana winter. But for now, it was just this moment. 2 people who'd each been broken in different ways, who'd found each other in desperation, and who'd built something lasting from that first impossible bargain. The land stretched out before them, hard and beautiful and theirs. And they were ready for whatever came next, together.